The president attempts to calm reaction to his summit with Vladimir Putin, while Congress considers another round of tax cuts before its summer recess. House Whip Congressman Steve Scalise is here to discuss it all. And later, the United States is launching a major initiative to protect and promote religious freedom abroad. Sam Brownback, Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, brings us an exclusive preview. And finally, part 2 of my interview with mother of poet and peace advocate Mattie Stepanek. Dr. JENI STEPANEK is here tonight to talk about Mattie's cause for sainthood. The world over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Steve Scalise, Sam Brownback, and JENI STEPANEK are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout. And now some news from the world over. President Donald Trump is looking to move past his tumultuous European tour and widely criticized press conference with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Before a White House cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Trump returned home to domestic issues, touting, among other things, the strength of the economy and being close to a bilateral trade agreement with Mexico. But Russia was still on the mind of the press. A reporter was able to sneak in a question.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank you very much.
Let's go.
There's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia. All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done, look at sanctions, look at ambassadors not there, look, unfortunately, at what happened in Syria recently. And I think President Putin knows that better than anybody, certainly a lot better than the media. He understands it, and he's not happy about it. And he shouldn't be happy about it, because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been.
For more on this, it has been a little over a year since my next guest was shot during a congressional baseball practice here in the Washington, D.C. area. His injuries were critical, but his recovery has been nothing short of miraculous. I sat down with Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise earlier today. We discussed his incredible recovery, his faith, and everything from immigration to gun control. In full disclosure, Congressman Scalise is my congressman in New Orleans. Here's our exclusive interview with House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Congressman, first of all, thank you for the time. I want to take you back. It's been a little over a year now since that day on the congressional practice field when you endured something that none of us hope to ever see, a real tragedy, but it changed you. I've spoken to your colleagues and they say you're a different man afterward. Do you see that?
Probably not as much as them, because it didn't change my philosophy. It more changed, I think, my focus. And you realize what's important in life when you go through something like this. I mean, you know, coming this close to not making it. You know, I know that I wanted to get back and, you know, be able to go home and see my family again at home, and then to get back to work. I loved my job, and wondered sometimes if I was going to be able to do that. So it really does sharpen your focus on the things that matter in life.
How is your recovery? Where are you now? And how has your faith sustained you through this recovery process?
My faith has been just unbelievable in helping give me the strength to get through this, because I already had a strong faith and prayed to God that morning for some very specific things, and God looked out for me. He provided real miracles that day. But then it was the prayers of friends and family back home, but people all across the country, people I'd never met before that were praying for me. That gave me incredible strength. I felt it, and I've shared that with people because I think it's important to know. I mean, we're all asked to pray for people every day that we might not know, or a friend who's got his mom has cancer. And you say the prayer, and maybe you wonder, you know, I'm saying it out of courtesy, but does it really go anywhere? It really does have an impact on people. And
it certainly did.
And sure had an impact on me.
Because of your experience and what you went through that day, you, I think, more than so many who talk about what should we do about gun violence, what should be our response policy-wise, you have a unique perspective. Now, the Bishops' Conference, as you know, have supported some gun control restrictions. They are for a ban on assault weapons, limits to high-capacity magazines, penalties for gun trafficking, restrictions on those who can purchase. Would you support those measures? And how do you receive that as a Catholic?
First of all, there's already a large number of laws on the books that limit in different ways people's ability to buy guns. I'm real concerned when you see attempts by government to make it harder for law-abiding citizens to get guns, because it was two people, two heroes, the United States Capitol Police officers, David Bailey and Crystal Griner, that were there with me that morning. If they didn't have their guns to counter the shooter, I wouldn't be here, and a lot of other members of Congress wouldn't be here. I mean, it's that dramatic. So the idea of taking away guns, look, the person that's out there to break another law, there's already 10 or 12 laws you're going to break before you kill somebody with a gun. And to think that some new magic law is going to stop it from happening, let's enforce the laws on the books. Let's make sure that we're addressing things like mental health, which we've done some things in Congress to do that. But at the end of the day, when they talk about each shooting is different, first of all. So it was a bump stock in Vegas. It might be an AR-15 here. In the case of my shooting, it was a semi-automatic rifle that nobody would suggest taking away. I mean, there have been mass crimes committed with shotguns. Nobody's trying to suggest taking away shotguns. So why don't we focus on the things that actually can make a difference and not try to take away more guns from law-abiding citizens? That's only going to stop and let the next shooter have free reign over other people.
Congressman, a lot of people forget your shooting, the shooting you were a victim of, was politically motivated. And are you concerned about the rhetoric and the hot rhetoric we're hearing and the talk of violence accompanying it? And how do we alleviate that? Do you fear when you come into the Capitol every day that you're going to endure something else like this?
Well, you can't live your life in fear, first of all. I made that decision early off after I was recovering that I'm not going to focus on what happened. I'm going to focus on getting better, because it takes all of my energy to keep getting better and go through the physical therapy I need to learn how to walk again and ultimately be able to walk without crutches. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I was worried about other factors. You know, you've just got to live your life, and we've got to reduce this toxic rhetoric, though. And I've been very vocal to my colleagues. Let's disagree on the issues we disagree on. I mean, that's what's great about our country, is that we can express our disagreements with government, with colleagues, with your friends. But you don't make it personal. You don't incite violence. You shouldn't be encouraging people to go out and harass somebody in the Trump administration because you don't agree with their policies. That's not acceptable. That's not what our democracy is about. It's not about violence. We settle our differences at the ballot box. That's what makes America unique and great. We can't allow that to escape.
You were standing behind Speaker Ryan the other day when he corrected the president's comments in Helsinki. Now, the president himself has since come out and clarified them. Is that correction sufficient for you and the House members?
I think it is. You know, first of all, what the president did is stand behind our intelligence agencies, which I stand behind, but also he stood behind the work that we did in the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes's committee, important work that exposed a lot of this underbrush over at the FBI, where you had people over there with very, very, I think, irrational and irresponsible political motivations, people who were trying to stop President Trump from getting elected. We've exposed that, but we also exposed that Russia did meddle with the election. There was no collusion between either campaign, and the meddling that Russia did didn't have an effect on the outcome. They didn't change a vote at a ballot box, but they meddled, and we ought to stop them from meddling. But President Trump pointed all of that out.
How serious a misstep was this in Helsinki?
Well, I think, first of all, the fact that he corrected it is a significant point to make. And it's, you know, presidents rarely do that.
But the president also kind of equivocated a little bit. He said, look, I support our intelligence community. Russia meddled in the election, but others might have too, which kind of undercut
clearly it doesn't mean just Russia meddled. I mean, that's a correct statement. There are other countries who try to meddle in our elections, not just Russia. So to think it's just Russia trying to do it, Russia did try to do it. They weren't successful, fortunately, but we ought to push back. We've increased sanctions against Russia. What I look at is the actions that President Trump has taken to stand up against Russia. And those are significant, by the way. Things that President Obama didn't do. Look, the Ukrainians asked President Obama for help to push back against Russian aggression. They wanted to buy missiles from the United States. President Obama kept pushing back and delaying and not authorizing it. President Trump very quickly gave them that help, allowed them to stand up to the Russians. He expelled Russian diplomats. He's increased sanctions against Russia. So President Trump has taken real action to stand up against Russia, and ultimately it's those actions that we ought to be looking at.
I want to talk about a move to impeach Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. There is a movement among some of your House members to do so. I know the Speaker is at odds with them. Their rationale is he's not cooperating with our probe, he's not forthcoming with documents. Do you support that move to impeach Rod Rosenstein?
Well, I think, and I've talked to Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan about this, and what they're doing ultimately is pushing to get the Justice Department and the FBI to comply with our investigation and our oversight. And we saw for a while that the FBI was not complying. And so using every tool that's available, and obviously impeachment is a tool that's available, you don't want to have to use it, but to lay that on the table and say, look, if you don't comply, you have to comply with Congress. Give us the documents that we requested. There's some real serious allegations about bad apples in the FBI. Frankly, the FBI ought to be working with us to root out the bad apples, not trying to cover this up. And if they're going to try to cover it up, we're going to use every tool we have. And so I support their efforts to get the facts and the truth. And we're getting more facts and more truth every step of the way, in part because of the fact that we're willing to put our tools on the table.
Immigration remains a hot topic. I know you hear about it every day. There's certainly bills that have been swirling around for a long time. The Bishops' Conference, the Catholic bishops, have come out against the family separation. The president has tried to repair that. I want to read you their statement. They said, our government has the discretion in our laws to ensure that young children are not separated from their parents. And they go on, they say, separating babies from their mothers is not the answer, and it is immoral. When you saw that as a Catholic, you thought what?
Well, I agree that we don't want to be separating parents and children. The law, ultimately, in court rulings over the law, things like what's called the Flores decision, have forced the administration to separate. Think about this. Current policy, as it's being carried out under law, says if you have a family that comes across the border illegally, and you take the parents and you go and find out if they were breaking the law, and if it turns out they were breaking the law, by law today, you have to send the parents back and keep the children here. That's crazy. We ought to fix that, by the way, in both immigration reform bills that we had on the House floor, what were called Goodlatte 1 and Goodlatte 2. Both bills fully funded the wall that President Trump requested, and I strongly support that. But both bills fixed and reversed that Flores decision so that the kids and the parents stay together. Whether they stay together might mean you came here illegally, you have to go back home together as a family. You don't split the families up.
Do we essentially have catch and release now, where they're catching these families, but then they're releasing them because of a
catch and release?
A judge said you can't detain
catch and
the
release
families.
Is the policy today because of previous and current law. We need to change that. Again, in our bills that we passed, or that we tried to pass out of the House, we ended catch and release. We need to reverse those policies. We ended the visa lottery system, which is a crazy current legal immigration law that says every year we let in 55,000 people into our country legally, where they literally pluck the names out of a hat, and in many cases from countries who don't even like us. Why are we doing that? We reversed that in the bill we brought to the floor. We weren't able to pass it. Not one Democrat, by the way, voted for any of these bills to fix these problems.
Two quick questions before I let you go. This week, you all are focusing on tax reform. Kevin Brady raised the issue the other day that you will make these tax changes permanent. When the last round of budget cuts and the spending bill already blew a hole in the deficit, can we afford to make these tax cuts permanent?
Well, first of all, the fact that we cut taxes is getting our economy moving again. A healthy economy is not only good to rebuild our middle class, families see more money in their paychecks. That's a really good thing.
Government
but it's also giving, government actually takes in more money. And so it's, some people don't believe in that form of economics, that when the economy is doing well, more money comes into the Treasury. But the facts are on our side, that you actually get more revenue generated because people are working. Look right now, what's happening right now, Raymond. You've got millions of people who had given up looking for work under the Obama economy, where you had slow growth, high unemployment. Millions of people just gave up looking for work, so they don't even show up in your unemployment numbers. Well, today we've got more job openings right now than there are people looking for work. That's a great thing, but it also means now we're seeing millions of people come back into the workforce. And as they come back into the workforce, they're not on welfare, they're actually earning a living, paying taxes, becoming part of the American dream again. So that increases money to the federal treasury. That's a good thing. We need to keep it going. We need to make the tax cuts permanent.
Speaker Ryan has already said he's stepping down. Your name has been floated many times as a possible successor. First of all, should Paul Ryan step down before midterms for fundraising purposes, for the purposes of having the caucus coalesce behind a single vision and a single leader that they know will lead them on the other side? And are you in the running for Speaker? Are you throwing your hat into the ring?
Well, first of all, when the Speaker made his decision, I respect it. I mean, look, Paul's got a young family. He wants to be able to spend more time with his family, see his kids grow up. And very few speakers, by the way, have been able to leave on their own terms. When you go back in history, maybe Tip O'Neill might be the last speaker who left on their own terms. And so it's not easy to do, and our conference fully supports what he's doing. And by the way, he's been able to continue to set records, raising money so that we can keep our majority. What I've always said in terms of what I'm doing today, I love this job that I have. It's a job that takes a lot of time. I get to work with every member of our conference, which is a great part of it. Get to know them better. Also get to help them push the agenda that they want, the conservative agenda that's got us the majority. We better stay focused on continuing to do our job because the majority's up for grabs. You see Nancy Pelosi out there. She's saying she'll be Speaker again. She's saying as Speaker, by the way, she'll raise taxes. She will abolish ICE. Literally, think about that. Getting rid of the people who enforce our border laws.
Well, you wanted to bring a bill forward to allow a vote on it.
Yeah, I said, okay, if they want
to
abolish ICE, let's call them on it and put the bill on the floor and make everybody vote because it's a radical idea. Well, you know, look, he's got some other things he wants to focus on. We're bringing a bill to the floor that will at least stand behind our ICE agents. We support ICE. We support the brave men and women who sacrifice their lives to get these drug dealers and these terrorists, human traffickers out of our country. So anyway, that's something we're going to continue to push. We need to move our conservative agenda, show the contrast between what we're doing to get the economy moving and what Nancy Pelosi would do to reverse that. And then we've got to hold the majority. And if we lose focus on that, nobody's going to be arguing over who's going to be Speaker because it'll be Nancy Pelosi. We can't let that happen.
What's the hardest part of this job before I let you go?
You know, every day is a different day, so it makes it a lot of fun.
For you.
But you just don't have enough time in the day. I mean, there's so many things that you want to do that you just don't have the time to do. You squeeze as much as you can into a day. Last night it ended at 11:30 at night. But you know what? It's a great job. I love being able to be back here, back in the game, doing this job that I love. And you know, how do you complain? Every day you wake up, you know, God's given me a gift.
Well, thank you, and thanks for being our congressman and doing it so well.
Appreciate it.
My thanks to Congressman Steve Scalise and his staff for facilitating the interview. Sam Brownback is up next, but first, some more news to share with you. The New York Times is reporting that Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, who was recently removed from public ministry, has been accused of sexually harassing adult seminarians, something the church knew about for decades. According to interviews and documents obtained by the Times, between 1994 and 2008, multiple reports of the cardinal's transgressions were made to American bishops and the papal nuncio here in Washington, as well as Vatican officials. Yet during that time, McCarrick rose through the ranks of the church hierarchy to become one of the church's most prominent cardinals. One common accusation, McCarrick would invite a few specially favored seminarians to overnight stays at a beach house in Sea Girt, New Jersey, a retreat purchased by the Diocese of Metuchen at the behest of then Bishop McCarrick in 1984. Once there, McCarrick would invite one seminarian to share his bed. These accusations never advanced beyond inappropriate touching, but others did. 2 lawsuits involving the cardinal were settled years later. Cardinal McCarrick, now 88, was removed from ministry only last month after the Archdiocese of New York deemed credible an accusation that he had molested a 16-year-old altar boy nearly 50 years ago. In Nicaragua, violence by police and pro-government paramilitaries continue. This past weekend, 2 students, among them 150 protesters who sought refuge in a Managua parish, were killed when paramilitaries fired on the besieged church. It is the latest incident where the church has been targeted as clerics seek to mediate peace talks between the government and opposition groups. In a separate incident, Nicaraguan Bishop Juan Mata, one of the national mediators in the talks, was attacked while stopped at a police checkpoint. Bishop Mata was not injured, but his car's tires and windows were damaged when the vehicle was fired upon. The bishop then had to take shelter in a house that was later surrounded by supporters of President Daniel Ortega. The Archdiocese of Managua intervened, getting the government to send the police commissioner to the home to guarantee the bishop's safe passage. The country's bishops' conference released a statement saying they have witnessed the government's lack of political will to dialogue sincerely and to seek real processes that would lead to a true democracy. End quote. They added that Ortega's government has refused to address the dismantling of the pro-government paramilitaries. Protests against Daniel Ortega that began on April 18th have resulted in the deaths of some 300 people. To tell us more about the efforts of the U.S. State Department to promote and protect religious freedom and religion abroad is the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom at the U.S. Department of State, Sam Brownback. I sat down with him recently here in our D.C. studio. Take a look. Sam Brownback, great to see you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Raymond.
for coming back to the show. What has it been like being in this position, one that I have to say, having covered your career for so long, this is really a passion for you and has been for a long time.
It is. I feel like I'm going to work, but I'm not going to work. This is like going into your vocation, and you just show up, and every day you get to work with the best clients in the world, because there are people that are persecuted for their faith, whatever that faith is.
Right.
And a lot of them have just these really passionate stories or have had great difficulties, but in some cases, we can stop the suffering, we can get some people out of jail, and hopefully over the longer term, we can spread religious freedom around the world. That's the key objective.
Now, some would say the government shouldn't be in the business of affirming a faith at all. And why do you have to be in this business at all? And does it have a function at the State Department?
Well, it has an absolute, and it's a central function of government, because this is the protection of one of your foundational
freedoms,
rights, your human rights. The right to what do you do with your own soul, and it emanates from the dignity that you are as a person. You as a person have the right to do with your own soul what you choose, and no government has the right to get in the way of that. And our argument to these other governments is, you know, look, the space you occupy as government is to protect the right. Not to pick winner or loser, not to favor one or the other. It's to protect the right of the individual to practice their faith or no faith at all.
Your boss, Secretary of State Pompeo, announced not long ago this ministerial to advance religious freedom. I want to play this bite for you and get your reaction. Roll that.
This ministerial, we expect, will break new ground. It will not just be a discussion group. It will be about action. We look forward to identifying concrete ways to push back against persecution and ensure greater respect for religious freedom for all.
This ministerial will begin on July 24th. What is the intention of it? How will this work?
It's to spread religious freedom around the world. It's to see the gates of religious freedom fly open around the world. We've invited a number of countries, those that agree with us and those who are aspiring to be religiously free countries, to come to it. And we're getting a large uptake, because most people are seeing this as saying, yes, that's something we want to do. Now, we've got a caveat. We don't like this group. We don't like that group. No. You don't pick the groups. You protect the right. That's what you're about. And we're still getting a lot of interest and support.
So how will this work? I mean, Secretary Pompeo said this is not just going to be a discussion group, this is an action group. What does that mean?
Well, afterwards, we're going to go to these countries that come, and we're going to ask them, would you host religious freedom sessions in your nation? Would you host them in your region? Would you consider appointing somebody that can be a special envoy or an ambassador for religious freedom in your nation or for around the world? We're going to put forward some ideas that we think are useful in their country to, again, to spread this, because we don't want it just to be a discussion. Having said that, this is the first time this has ever been tried, to our knowledge, in the world, where you're getting a ministerial, foreign ministers from around the world together on the topic of religious freedom. First time ever.
And as a practical part, too, you all will also be having conversations about how to apply for grant money from the United States for aid to advance religious freedom in countries around the world.
That's the precursor day where we're going to have NGOs and religious groups there, and we provide aid in different places. We're also going to, on top of just government aid, we're going to have private foundations there that are working in the religious freedom space, because there's just a lot of interest and a lot of action taking place here in various places around the world, so that private sector funding's coming in too.
You have said that a lack of religious freedom not only creates space for terrorism, but can destroy an economy.
It does.
Where do you see that most prominently now?
Yeah, well, frankly, you see it all over the world, and now you're seeing it in the data. We're finally now getting some studies that track this. If you want less terrorism, provide more religious freedom. And most governments think if I want less terrorism, I'm going to just stomp on my religious minorities. Wrong answer. You're going to get more terrorism. If you want more economic growth, provide more religious freedom. You get more people coming in, you get more thoughts, you get more of this interaction of individuals taking place if people are free to practice their faith. And then the final thing that's an intangible, we know it's important, is you release spiritual capital. You release communities to build hospitals and schools and things like that, that a government can't get all this done.
And that creates the civil society that you need, as we're seeing in places like Iraq and Syria. Without that, it's very difficult for people to return.
I was just less than a week ago in a hospital that had been trashed by ISIS. And people there, they'd renovated a few pieces of the hospital, so there's people crowding into it. How do you grow a community without some form of health care, and it's been trashed by your terrorists? You need these as foundational building blocks, and you release it when you release, really, religious freedom.
How much money, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but how much money does the United States set aside for advancing religious freedom?
Their budget's not large. Like, for instance, the budget, there's about $20 million in the office that I'm in that helps promote these sort of issues. But there's substantial other pieces of money,
aid and development elsewhere.
Aid and development and other places that they will work with civil society components, or even really much of our food aid is delivered through civil and religious groups. Catholic Relief Services delivers a lot of the actual aid because the places are just difficult to get into, but CRS is there.
Give me a sense of the personal side of this. I know you met with an evangelical pastor in Turkey, Andrew Brunson. He has been held on espionage charges.
Treason.
You met with him.
I met with his wife when I was at his trial. You know, you start to feel a little bit of their pain that they go through every day. And you also get to see the amazing grace that they have as the strength that's with them to go through something that's horrific. These charges against him are completely false, they're specious. He's accused of treason. He's not done anything like that, but you get to see their strength. I meet with guys that have been in jail for 5-10 years and happy, and you're looking at them going, how'd you do that? But it's that faith that then comes pouring through them. And then you also meet with like Yazidi women that were raped and sold 5-7 times, kids ripped out of their arms, and they're crying there, and you're just going, how could somebody do this to an individual? But you know, while there is good, there's also evil in the world, and we're here to fight the evil.
Ambassador, what instruments are you recommending coming out of this ministerial, the meetings that you have privately with people who are being persecuted, actively persecuted? What instruments are available at the governmental level? Sanctions? Is that the most obvious weapon here?
Sanctions are available, but they're kind of one of the tools that's down the list of ways. At the outset, it's really trying to talk and advise a country into this. Do you want to grow? You want less terrorism? This is the right way to go. Past that, then it's really more trying to cajole them, saying, okay, you want to build your relationship with the United States? I hope you do. We want to see it grow. This is an impediment. Your lack of religious freedom is an impediment. It's an impediment to attracting capital. It's an impediment to our support. If you don't get there, you start to look at it and say, you know, we may put you on the countries of particular concern list, where you're one of the countries that in the world is doing the worst on religious freedom. And then if that doesn't work, you say, okay, you know, we're going to throw every brick we can now to try to get you to do what you need to do for your own country. I had a meeting the other day with a guy, nation, and they're moving the right direction. And I said at the end of it, you know, there are going to be millions of people in your country that are going to live a better life if we get this right. And it's true.
Your office has put out for years a report each year on the state of religious freedom in various countries. And as you mentioned a moment ago, there are always nations of particular concern. What does that mean within the government? So many times you see nations there, but there's no downside for them being on that list.
Yeah, and that's been true in some cases. We list them there because we're looking at saying these are the worst actors in the world. They have the most persecution. Now, unfortunately, about 3/4 of the world's population lives in a religiously restrictive environment where you're not free to practice your faith. But these countries of particular concern are the worst actors, and that's why we're citing them. But I think you're going to start seeing more action come out of that we're going to start taking more action. To either you improve your act or we're going to further distance ourselves and we're going to have more difficulty between the two of us because it's such a foundational issue.
Is there a closer relationship? I mean, you may or may not know this, but I bet you would. Do you sense a closer relationship or a higher interest level on the part of Secretary Pompeo? He seems to be much more engaged in this area of religious freedom, and you all seem to have a tighter relationship than other ambassadors in the past.
Well, we're both Kansans, you know, and so the Kansas is the center of the universe, as you know, and we knew that for a long time, but other people just hadn't
We're just
quite
catching on.
Yeah.
See, I thought it was New Orleans all this time. But this is good that you're waking me up to the reality. You all are both also fellow Catholics, which helps to have a sense of faith.
No, he's not.
Oh, I thought Pompeo was Catholic.
No, he's not, but he's a man of faith.
Yeah.
And these are very serious issues to him. Plus, just on top of it, I think we're coming around to the realization as a government that for a lot of years, religious freedom is important, but we're willing to trade it off for other assets or other concerns. Now we're looking at this is so central that we've got to get this one right. And if we do, these other things will get improved. Therefore, let's not be willing to trade this off because it's just too central to the further development of a nation and the further the environment that's better, secure environment.
I want to talk about a few specific cases. The religious detentions in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran. This goes on. How do you manage this? Because on the one level, you need some of these partners in the region to balance out other concerns. Some of them you're in open conflict with over nuke deals and other things. So how does this religious component factor into the conversation?
It becomes a part of the conversation, and it's a regular part of the conversation if it's an ally like Saudi Arabia. Like when we're talking with Saudi Arabia, we're going, look, we're allies, we've been working together for years. This needs to improve substantially, and then we'll offer a list of names of people that are incarcerated. The president, he will raise people. 3 people that were released out of North Korea, you know, 2 of them were people that were teaching at a faith-associated in situations. So the president raises that. But then it'll also be something, if it's somebody that we're fighting with, the Iranians, you're just going, you know, look, we need to point out what is going on inside Iran that is very harmful to the Iranian people. Not unlike really the Soviet dissident and the Soviet Jewry movement, where Reagan and others are pointing out, why are you treating your own people this way? Why don't they have any freedom? If you're a Sunni Muslim in Shia Iran, you have very little rights or options of things you can do. And if you're a Baha'i or a Christian, the persecution level can be great.
Tell me about the situation in Myanmar, which is one I know you have been attentive to.
It's terrible. It's one of the worst situations. 1 million people, they're ethnic Rakhine, they're religious Muslims being pushed out by a majority Buddhist nation into refugee camps, killed, systematically been going after them. This isn't the first rodeo for Burma. They've been doing this, and now they're going at the Kachin that are mostly Christian in the northern part of the country. And you just got to put your foot down and say, no, this is completely wrong.
How much leverage do we have in that region and in Myanmar itself?
Not a lot, but there is a moral obligation to stand up for the people of the world when they're being persecuted just simply because of who they are. And we've seen this happen in other places and nations, and we generally regret if we don't step in and push back aggressively. And that's why you're seeing really the United States taking steps. You know, they've been cautious, but taking aggressive steps moving forward against what's happening there.
Before I let you go, Mr. Ambassador, Pew just did a research report. They looked at 198 nations, and they see religious intolerance and a contracting of religious freedom growing around the world. How do you explain that? What do you think is driving that?
I think really what's happening is that people and nations in particular, are grabbing hold of a religious identity. And then as that gets somewhat questioned or attacked, or people start coming in with different ideas because the world's so small, that group then is rebuffing them, and they're going with the majority religious status and fighting against other people instead of being open and saying, well, look, we'll hear, just don't be violent. But instead, they're being exclusive. They're passing blasphemy or apostasy laws to try to exclude religious minorities. And it really is the wrong way for a nation to go if they want to grow. But unfortunately, politically, it can be a very good place for a politician if they want to get popular and supported in that nation.
You have run the gauntlet, really, on Capitol Hill, at the State House, running the government in Kansas. What's the biggest challenge of this job, politically or otherwise?
Not enough time in the day. Unfortunately, they're just, in this job, it's a global position, and there's just so much going on in so many places, and a lot of it's really ugly. And so you're just looking at it, guys, we need to deal with this situation in Nigeria. We need to be in Mozambique. We need this situation here. And but there's a lot of support in the administration. The administration is absolutely gung-ho to push this topic. The president is, the vice president and his office really working hard, the secretary. There's a lot of support.
Did that surprise you?
Problems.
Because you've been involved. I remember when you went to Darfur early on.
I did.
So you've been involved in the political side of religious freedom and the struggle over it for a long time. Have you ever seen an administration this committed to the topic?
Never. I haven't seen one half as committed to this topic.
Did that surprise you, given Donald Trump? You know, he's not an expressively religious person or a man of
No, but you know what
belief.
happened in that campaign is that a lot of people of faith got behind him. And it kind of, he'll say, you danced with the lady what brung you. And I think he looks at this. And then plus I think he's just within all of us, there's this sort of interior moral outrage when you see somebody persecuted for a simple thing of trying to practice their own faith as they see fit. That's not right. You should not be persecuted for that. And it's a God-given right, and the government shouldn't do that, and some terrorist group shouldn't do that. And I think that boils up in him.
Yeah. Sam Brownback, thank you for being here, Mr. Ambassador. And we will be covering the ministerial in the days ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you. Pleasure. You can learn more about the work of Ambassador Sam Brownback on the State Department's website at state.gov. JENI STEPANEK is up next, right after these stories. The Catholic Church has consecrated virgins, women who have pledged lifelong virginity as brides of Christ, are taking issue with a new Vatican document. It says consecrated virgins no longer need to be virgins. The Vatican's new instruction on consecrated virginity, Ecclesiae Sponsae Imago, was published and approved by Pope Francis at the request of bishops who were reporting a boom in the number of women being called to this vocation. There was a section in the 39-page document that drew the ire of those already consecrated virgins. It appears to suggest that lifelong virginity is no longer a requirement for consecration. It reads, "The call to give witness to the Church's virginal, spousal, and fruitful love for Christ is not reducible to the symbol of physical integrity. Thus, to have kept her body in perfect continence or to have practiced the virtue of chastity in an exemplary way, while of great importance with regard to the discernment, are not essential prerequisites, in the absence of which admittance to consecration is not possible." The U.S. Association of Consecrated Virgins said the document was deeply disappointing and that it is shocking to hear from Mother Church that physical virginity may no longer be considered an essential prerequisite for consecration to a life of virginity. There are approximately 5,000 consecrated virgins in at least 42 countries. Finally tonight, she is the mother of Mattie Stepanek, the inspiring young poet, peace advocate, and philosopher. In the years since Mattie's death, JENI STEPANEK has carried on his message in an extraordinary way. In part 2 of our interview, we continued our discussion of Mattie's message of peace and the current state of his cause for sainthood. Here's more of my exclusive interview with Dr. JENI STEPANEK. A cause has been started for his sainthood, of which I am a part, in full disclosure. Give me a sense, a part of that process is heroic virtue, and virtue well lived. I know Mattie had a devotion to Andre Bessette. Tell me about, he received a relic from Andre Bessette, which was very important to him at a particular time.
In 2001, Mattie almost died. He slipped into several comas, and in fact the doctors said he would not survive more than a few days, possibly a few weeks if he was lucky. His body literally was dying around his spirit. One of the big problems was his trachea was eroding, just falling apart, and he was bleeding constantly. He was bleeding from his fingers, his lips, his trachea, his feet. And somebody brought him a relic from Andre Bessette. And at the time, Andre Bessette was beatified but not canonized. And Mattie prayed for several weeks with this relic sitting on his hospital tray. And then he asked to go home. And the doctors disagreed with him going home. They said, you're going to die, and if you go home, you're going to die in agony. If you stay here, we can at least comfort you and give you pain medicine for those final minutes. And he said, I have to live until the moment I die. And if I stay here, I'm dying until the moment I die. He said, I still have purpose. I still have a message. I cannot finish my mission, my ministry in the hospital. And he said, I think I've got more time. And he was just absolutely convinced.
How old was he at this point?
He was 10 when he began it. He went home just about a week or two after he turned 11. And on the day that they said he could go home, they were sending him home in an ambulance because they really didn't think he would survive the trip home. But it was his wish to be at home, and they were respecting his wish. He picked up the relic of Andre Bessette, and he said out loud, Brother Andre, you need a miracle to become a saint, and I need a miracle to fulfill my purpose from God. Let's work together. And he touched the relic to his trachea, and then he closed his eyes and said a silent prayer. He never talked to me about what he said. And after a minute, he put the relic down, and the bleeding stopped, stopped. And he said, okay, I'm ready to go home. And I looked, and I went and got the doctors, and I said, the bleeding stopped. And the doctors were concerned. They said, when the bleeding stops, what's likely going to happen is it's going to scab, and the first time he coughs, it's going to just perforate the entire trachea, and he's going to suffocate. And they said, do you still want to take him home? Because this was what we've been waiting for. And I talked to Mattie, and he said, no, I've gotten a miracle. And I said, what if you're wrong? What if this is scabbing? And he said, no, I know I've gotten a miracle. I'm ready to go home and fulfill my purpose.
And this is before Oprah,
before all that, yes.
The poetry, before all of that.
Yes. But he had already written most of the poetry.
Right.
The whole Oprah, I'd like to go back to that if that's okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because a lot of people know him from, and they think, well, he was Oprah's most frequent guest.
Right.
And that's what they know him from.
Right, but there's a whole different story. But what happened was he did get a miracle. He lived another 3 years before that bleeding started back up, and he died. And in that 3 years is when everybody learned about him. But we were shocked when he went home, and literally the bleeding stopped, and the doctors could not explain it. And then he believes that he got another miracle. A few months later, he had another open sore that needed surgery. And actually, speaking of Oprah had asked him what he wanted for Christmas, and he said prayer. And so she got worldwide prayer for him.
I remember
and
that.
The sore on the back of his head that had been there for almost a year that was getting to a life-threatening point just closed up. They could not explain it. On the 30th day of prayer, she had 30 days of prayer. On day 30, the sore closed up and never opened again. But yes, he received a miracle, and he kept that relic on his wheelchair until the day he died. I now have the relic next to my bed in his honor.
You've recently found a speech that Mattie wrote,
Yes.
where he lays out the building blocks of peace, and he talks particularly about pro-life, being pro-life. What did he say in that talk?
He was invited to be a keynote speaker at a youth rally in Southern Maryland. He was 11 years old, and I was just telling somebody about this, and I said, I have some of his notes, and I pulled it up, and it actually is a well-written out. He must have gone back and journaled about it later. But I was amazed as I was just skimming through it, and he's talking about the building blocks of life, and he breaks down hope and peace and talks about building blocks of hope, and one of them is courage and fortitude, and building blocks of peace. One of the biggest building blocks of peace is forgiveness. He said we must forgive other people. We must embrace kindness. So he talks a lot about courage, forgiveness, and being rooted in faith. And he talks about, people argue about right to life, right to pro-life, pro-choice, and he said really life is a gift, it's not a choice. So that was, he said it's almost an oxymoron that we're talking about life, not a choice.
He knew many times, he had an intuition about what was about to happen. Tell me about the situation when he was 4 years old and he's playing in the yard.
Yeah, Mattie often knew what was going to happen in the next moment or a year later sometimes. And one time when he was 4, he and a little friend were playing in our backyard, and we lived on a block where the backyards were shared. And so the mom of this little girl he's playing with, she's in her kitchen window, I'm in my kitchen window, and we're both looking out, and we both happened to see Mattie jump up and literally start dragging this little girl, like dragging her, pulling her, dragging her, and he's screaming something at the top of his lungs, and it looks like he's being mean, and Mattie was not a mean child. Mattie was one of the kindest kids you're ever going to meet. And so the other mother and I both go running out, you know, it's like, what are you doing? Stop that now. And we hear Mattie saying, move, move, God said move, and he's screaming and he's grabbing this little girl, and he gets her to the other side of the yard, and he's just frantic. And then all of a sudden we hear this loud cracking noise. It's a beautiful sunny day. There's no wind, there's nothing. There's been no storm for weeks. We hear this ear-splitting, cracking noise, and then we hear bang, 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 thud. And we look, and right where they had just been sitting, there's the whole top half of the tree has fallen down into the earth and made this 8-inch indentation right where they were sitting. And the other mother said, Mattie, how did you know? Did you hear something? And he said, no, God said move. That was that. And so he moved.
He did that throughout his life, by the way.
Yes, he did.
God
he
said
moved.
move,
Yeah,
he
God
went.
said move. If God said something,
That's
Mattie
right.
listened. And there's many instances, there's many things that Mattie just knew something that was going to happen, or knew the source of something that had occurred. Mattie knew his own life. He told me on July 16th, and the reason I know the date, it was the day before his 10th birthday. On the last day he was 9, July 16th, 2000, he said, March 30th is a dark day for me. And I said, March 30th, that's random.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's not random. God told me March 30th is a dark day for me. And we're at the beach when he says this. I mean, we're playing,
Yeah.
we're having
A
fun.
good
There's
time, yeah.
no reason for me to think March 30th is going to be a dark day. But he said, I'm not sure I survive March 30th. Something dreadful is going to happen, and it's dark. It's very, very dark. and I'm afraid I'm not going to finish my purpose. I'm afraid that's the end of my life. And as it turns out, he got very, very sick in March and was very delirious in the days leading up to March 30th. His doctor had been aware of this premonition and was watching him carefully. And Mattie was so delirious the last 5 days before March 30th that he couldn't even know it was March 30th. And on March 30th, his blood sugar went up to something like 800, and he literally totally, when they got him to open his eyes, he said, "It's dark. It's dark, I can't see." And he went into a coma. And they said he's not going to survive the night. And it was March 30th. And they had a priest come in and anoint him, Father Dixon. And Mattie was completely unresponsive even to pain. And when Father Dixon anointed him, when he got to the end of the anointing and the prayers, he said, "In the name of the Father and of the Son and he stopped and started crying. And I looked up thinking, oh my gosh, Mattie's just died, but I don't hear any alarms. And Mattie is making the sign of the cross. He's unresponsive to pain, and he's making the sign of the cross with all these tubes coming out of him. I will tell you as a mom, when midnight hit, March 30th into 31st, I cried with relief because I thought he didn't die on March 30th. He's got more time. And I felt better, even though the doctor said he's not going to survive. I knew he was. But then on his 13th birthday, a day he should have been celebrating, what he wanted was to become a teenager. And on a day that he's simultaneously celebrating with Maryland crabs and chocolate ice cream cake, he's also struggling emotionally. And he said, "This is my last birthday." And he didn't die until June 22nd the next year. But I said, "How do you know this is your last birthday? We've been through this before." And he said, "Because God told me I've done a good job. There's no more messages. I've shaped the messages. There's nothing more for me to do. I finished what he gave me. And now I have to live with the silence of God giving me strength." He said, "God's here. God's with me. God's proud of me. But he's asking nothing else of me but to finish these last bits." And he said, "I'm done."
JENI, in the last few months, we have seen a real explosion, and it's a national epidemic, in suicides. We're seeing this among celebrities, you see it among sports figures. What would you say to people who feel hope is gone? There's no reason left to live.
I can honestly say I've been there. I've been there. I have questioned why I could take a next breath. And I can reassure anybody that if you can get through this dark moment, there will be another moment where you realize why hope is real. And that hope is real. And if you can't find that reason on your own, if you cannot connect to God, to prayer, to something inside of you, reach out to someone else. Allow someone else to give you hope. Allow someone else to be the reflection of God. Allow someone else to be your rope. When you get to the end of your rope, tie it to someone else's, because life is worthy. And as bad as this moment feels, and I honestly, I don't know other people's pain. I will never say I've felt other people's pain, but I know the pain of loss and suffering. I know the pain of burying 4 children. I know the pain of watching my children die. I know the pain of fearing for my own life. I know the pain of failed families and marriages. I mean, I know pain. I know what it's like to think there is no purpose. But I promise you there's always purpose. We're just not seeing it because of pain. Move through the pain will eventually go away. It's like any kind of injury. It doesn't always hurt this bad. It may never ever go away, but it doesn't always hurt this bad. And there will be at least happiness, if not joy, in some future moment. It will be okay. Ask somebody else to help you and be there for you. actually you're giving someone else a gift when you allow them to step in and be a source of hope for you. And that's what Mattie wanted to do. It's interesting that you brought that up, because that was one of the, when Mattie would be on TV, when Mattie's books would be published, people would reach out, all kinds of people, children, adults, people with disabilities, people without disabilities, people of all faiths and nationalities, that there was a significant percentage of people that reached out to him who were suffering, homeless, and suicidal. People that would say, "You've changed my mind. I don't want to die. I don't know why I want to live, but I don't want to die. Life is worthy. I'm going to be a source of hope for someone else." Because when you can't figure out why hope is real for you, if you try to be hope for someone else, suddenly you feel the hope again. And that's what Mattie would try to help people do, is what can you do for someone else? How can you shift the focus of your pain so that it's got a different meaning? Right. But there were countless people, people on death row, people who were suicidal, people who were angry and given up on God and on other people in the world, who would reach out either to say, "You've inspired me," or to ask Mattie for advice on how to take that next breath, that next step into that next moment.
For more information on Mattie Stepanek's life and the cause for sainthood, visit mattieonline.com. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. You can like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. The links are at raymondarroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.